Thank you for standing by. All lines have been placed on listen-only mode until the question-and-answer session of today's call. At that time, please press star one, unmute your phone, and record your name to ask a question. Today's call is also being recorded. If you disagree, you may disconnect. Please continue to hold. The call will begin shortly.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this NASA Media Telecon. I am Karen Fox with the Office of Communications, and we are talking today about the follow-up to the Psyche Independence Review Board report. We'll hear more about that as we go around, but there was an original report, and this is a follow-up that was requested and the NASA response. You will be hearing today from Nicola Fox, the Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters in Washington, Laurie Glaze, who is the Division Director for Planetary Sciences at NASA headquarters, Laurie Leshin, who is the Director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California, and Thomas Young, who is the Chair of this Psyche Independent Review Board. Everybody's going to have a few opening remarks, and then we will leave time for question and answers. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Nikki Fox.
Thanks so much, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. So NASA's Science Mission Directorate is really happy that the Psyche mission is on track for launch this October. As I'm sure you will recall, SMD launched an independent review board for the Psyche mission when the team announced that they could no longer make the 2022 launch date. We're really not afraid at NASA to take an unflinching view on what we do. And so NASA and JPL co-convened the independent review in July, and July of last year, and its report was delivered in November of 2022. We're really happy to see that the independent review board not only validated the decision to move forward with the mission, but also has said that the work done to address all of their recommendations has totally exceeded their already high expectations. The really cool thing was their review board helped us identify multiple issues that contributed to the delay, and that included communication, oversight, and staffing. And so what you're going to hear today is an update on the recommendations that were issued last November. And again, I'm so pleased to say that the progress made at JPL is not only outstanding, but is world-class, as determined by our review board. While our JPL Director, Laurie Leshin, will go over many of the changes that were implemented, it is important to keep in mind that even though it was JPL that was reviewed here, these issues are something that we really must take seriously, as well as the industry as a whole. We certainly don't feel that we can rest or even believe that the issues have gone away or will go away. What we really feel here is that we've started to change, and this change must continue in order to address our issues of workforce oversight and planning for the future. But as I say, it's a really good news story today, and so I'm delighted to pass it on to Tom Young, who will present the IRB findings.
Thank you, Nikki. My first comment is that the IRB believes the response to our Psyche project and JPL institution findings and recommendations to be excellent. When you read the report, which I believe you probably have by now, you'll see that we scored the responses to each of our recommendations with 3 possible grades. These 3 grades were adequate with additional work, and not adequate. I really want to be sure you understand as you read the report that the IRB considers both of the first 2 grades to be outstanding. We believe that Psyche is on a positive course for an October 2023 launch. We believe the 2023 launch readiness date is credible, and the overall probability of mission success is high. We commended the exceptional contributions of the principal investigator, the Psyche project, JPL senior leadership, and JPL line organization in reaching this status for the Psyche project. The IRB recognized that our JPL institution findings and recommendations were challenging and really require considerable time to complete the required corrective actions. However, we believed it was important, as did NASA and JPL, to assess progress after approximately 5 months of work. We were impressed by the results we observed that were well beyond our high expectations. We reviewed the responses to the findings and recommendations in senior management engagement, hiring and retention, hybrid work environment, and Caltech governance to be essentially complete and excellent. The progress and the future plans for flight project workload and line organization issues was most impressive. While there is extreme amount of work to go in these 2 areas, the IRB is confident that this will occur. The accomplishments in response to the JPL issues are the direct result of the engagement and leadership of the JPL director and senior leadership, which were, as has been mentioned, judged by the IRB as being world class. With that, I turn it over to our next speaker, who will be Laurie Leshin, director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, and thanks especially to the full IRB team for your intensive work with us over the last 9 months or so, and we're very pleased to get to share the results of our efforts here to put both the Psyche mission and the JPL institution on track. And thank you, Nikki, as well, for your very kind comments and your support. Certainly, when I started as JPL director just over a year ago, and this happened sort of within weeks of me joining JPL, I felt it was really important to get an independent assessment, so to help me take the steps necessary, along with our senior team here, to get the lab on track and get Psyche and all of our other missions on track. So we greatly appreciate the independent look that the IRB took, and also the collaboration with colleagues at NASA headquarters to get that done jointly. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about our response, and both on the Psyche side as well as on the institutional side. There's more about that summary in the slides that the IRB has put together. And again, happy to discuss further in Q&A if folks would like. But so in line with the IRB's initial report, we made significant changes both in the Psyche project and the JPL institution, and here's some examples. For Psyche, we added highly experienced staff to the team, including project manager Matt Wallace, and we reorganized the team around the work to go. At this point, I am pleased to report that the project is very nearly through all the key software testing that was the main challenge at the time of the delay, and that has gone well, and the team is on track with margin. Our team is heading to Florida to begin the final testing of the spacecraft in preparation for launch. The spacecraft has remained in Florida since last year. Right now, we have about 18 weeks to go. I counted myself last night We have about 18 weeks to go before launch, and we have about 7 weeks of schedule margin against that 18 weeks. So we're in really good shape. The project, I'm very pleased to report, is green across the board and on track for our October launch. So go Psyche. Very, very proud of that team. For the institutional response, here are a few examples of actions we've taken. So back at the end of January, our new hybrid work policy went into effect, which asked most people on our workforce to return to the lab at least 3 days a week and enabled project leadership to name those days so that teams could have really huddle up times when they're together on lab. And as a result, our daily attendance on lab is nearly double what it was in spring of 2022. So we've seen a big change in as a result of the new hybrid work policy and working with the projects on that. We've optimized our hiring and retention efforts, and we're bringing in more experienced workforce. We have hired hundreds of experienced employees in the last 9 months, and including more than 50 of those are people who had previously been at JPL, who left for other places during the Great Resignation, and in some cases before that. But we've brought them back to the lab. We've attracted them back to JPL. And again, they're very experienced and have the experience we need to work on our missions. And I'm also very pleased to report that our turnover rate is back at its historic levels, which is about just under 5% per year at the lab, which for those of you that follow the aerospace industry closely, you'll know that's quite low. And we're pleased to see that back where it belongs. So we've overcome our workforce issues, our missions are staffed, and we are much stronger today. And we have put a laser focus on staffing the projects. So again, we're in very good shape staffing-wise with Europa Clipper, with NISAR, with Mars Sample Return staffing. And by the way, speaking of our missions, all of our current missions are considering the results of the Psyche IRB and incorporating the lessons learned into their activities. For example, Europa Clipper has recently undergone a similar reorganization that Psyche went through, which helps focus more on what I would call the end game of getting a mission to the pad, focused on verification and validation of software, creation of flight rules, and closeout of the paperwork associated with ensuring that all the key risks have been appropriately reviewed and managed. In addition, we've overhauled our approach to monthly project status reviews at my level, at the senior leadership level of the lab, to ensure that we have more significant senior management oversight of our most critical missions. We are working to make sure that in those reviews, that we're setting up those reviews such that the most important issues are being brought forward and discussed in depth, setting the right tone for people to raise issues and concerns. We're not just asking the project managers how it's going, we're talking to multiple members of the team, and in every case we're asking what the teams to tell us specifically what do they need from the institution to support them being successful. So total overhaul of monthly project status. And finally, we've strengthened the line organization. That's our sort of our engineering organization. There are technical oversight and execution of missions in several ways that I can get into if people have questions about that. So those are just a few examples, and the list is long. As Tom said, we are not done changing JPL for the better. While ensuring we keep what's special and unique about this place, we're going to continue to work to make ourselves better, and we're going to track the forward work from here. We're not slowing down just because the Psyche IRB is concluding its work. What we've done here in the last 6 months or so is really exciting, and I want to thank our team, that's leaders across the entire lab, for responding quickly and with impact and with actions that are sustainable into the future. Tom and Nikki described the responses world-class, the IRB did in the report, and I know that's what we all expect of JPL, and I'm really pleased that we have really delivered and thrilled to hear that high recognition for what we've accomplished. In closing, I would just say, to me, this proves what I have always known to be true, which is that JPL can achieve anything it sets its mind to, and I'm very proud to be able to share some of that with you today. So thank you for that, and now I'll hand off to Laurie Glaze.
Great. Thank you, Laurie. Appreciate that, and really appreciate the dedicated effort that you and the JPL leadership team have put into the responses to all of the findings. I want to take the opportunity to, of course, thank Tom and the entire IRB This has been invaluable, the feedback that we've gotten from you, and as Nikki mentioned at the top, not just to Psyche and to JPL, but I think for all of our endeavors across the Science Mission Directorate, this has been really insightful. I also want to take this opportunity to especially commend the Psyche mission principal investigator, Lindy Elkins-Tanton, the project manager, Matt Wallace, and the deputy project manager, Henry Stone, for their leadership throughout this really difficult period. Not only did they do first-rate work responding to all of the IRB findings, but they were also able to keep the team inspired at the same time, and they really excelled in both areas, and just my heartfelt thanks to the leadership team on Psyche. Just a few comments here on the Psyche project. We are on track. The project is on track for launch in 2023. You heard from Tom Young that's been assessed by the IRB. They assessed the work that's been completed since the last report, since the report that was released in November. And as you heard, they noted that the project has exceeded expectations in all areas. Of course, there's still work to go. There's work ahead in order to get to launch, but that work really is the work that any mission needs to complete as it prepares for the launch and operations. The key here is that the mission is on track and certainly better prepared to handle the work ahead as they move closer to the launch. NASA headquarters, the program office, and the project standing review board will continue to work closely with JPL and with Psyche at every step along the way to ensure mission success and to ensure the on-time launch of Psyche. And so with that, I'm going to toss it back to Karen Fox for the Q&A. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. A reminder to our reporters that you can ask a question by hitting *1. Also, I didn't mention at the top of the telecon that this report and the NASA response is available at nasa.gov/live. Right now, there's a link to it right there at the top of that page. So go there for additional details and information about what we're discussing today. With that, I will go to our first question, which is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Good afternoon, and congratulations to everyone on this great news. Two questions. First of all, can maybe Nicola or someone talk about in plain terms the lessons learned from all of this for ongoing and future science missions? And then just can you update us on the total cost of the Psyche mission and how much this one-year delay added to that? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So the future funding for Psyche to meet all the life cycle costs, et cetera, will be worked with our stakeholders through our annual budget process. So you can sort of stay tuned for that. In terms of lessons learned, and I'm actually happy for Laurie Leshin or Laurie Glaze to also jump in on here. But I think it's really it's about making sure that you have the right workforce, that you have the right people doing the right jobs, and that you have a really accurate and effective communications path, so that if there are issues and there are strains in the missions, that they have an easy way to be able to raise that flag and deal with that issue quickly, so that everything stays on schedule. But it's really about having the right people in the mix. So Laurie Leshin, do you want to jump in, because you're really in the thick of the lessons learned?
I thought you did a great job there, Nikki, actually. So it's about, making sure that we have the team, give the team every chance to succeed, and that includes having a lot of opportunities for upward network communication, which obviously the pandemic really significantly hampered. It wasn't the only cause of what happened here, but it definitely contributed to it, both in terms of communication within the team and also with senior leadership. So, but somebody said to me the other day that mission success is dodging 1,000 bullets, and sometimes the other non-mission success is dodging 999. And the truth is that this team did a lot of things right, and they managed to get a spacecraft that was almost ready to fly to the Cape. Wasn't quite ready, though, and so we did the right thing by by raising our hands and taking the hard step of saying we're not ready, we can't do this with acceptable risk. So I think that's the other thing that I take away from this is that NASA, brave courage in that moment was rewarded and was treated appropriately, right? That the team did the right thing by saying, you know what, we're not there, we're not ready. And NASA did the right thing by not only learning lessons from this, but continuing that mission. And now we're going to get to go explore a fascinating metal world.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to our next question, which is Jeff Faust from Space News.
Good afternoon. Question probably for Dr. Fox. Has NASA done similar reviews at other centers that are involved with science missions to make sure that there aren't similar issues, be it with hybrid work or communications or other issues that might cause similar problems for other science missions? In other words, being a little bit more proactive in checking for these issues before they do cause a problem?
Hey, Jeff, that's an excellent question. So we're not doing like the full-up reviews. Obviously, they're very detailed, take a lot of time and a lot of effort, as I'm sure Tom Young will tell you how much effort these take. But what we are doing is we're making a very concerted effort to ensure that all of the lessons learned and any sort of best practices, et cetera, are being filtered to, or not being filtered, that's the wrong word, are being openly passed to all of the other centers. And so, folks in SMD are working actively to make sure that that happens, so that, these sort of best practices, full transparency, the communication path, the right workforce, et cetera, is being implemented at the other centers that are doing the science missions, just to make sure we don't fall into this again. As I said in my notes, it's not that we've solved everything here or where everything's great. What we're doing is we're starting these new processes to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't recur in other centers.
Great. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to our next question, which is from Emily Lakdawala at Sky and Telescope.
Hi. I was wondering what the progress on the responding to the IRB's recommendations means for starting work again on Veritas, perhaps, and accelerating the production of that mission.
So, Laurie Glaze, do you want to hit that one?
Yes, I'll take that one. So this is Laurie Glaze. Thank you, Emily, for the question. So this is certainly a really important step, and one of the things that we had identified as a key criterion for being able to restart the work on Veritas. It's certainly really good news that a lot of the workforce challenges that were identified by the IRB, that those have been addressed, and we are seeing missions that are being fully staffed. That's all great. We also had identified that we need to make sure that some of the bigger projects that at JPL are staying on track and not impacting some of the other work going on. One of those was making sure that NISAR was delivered on time. That has happened. It is delivered, so that's a great milestone there as well. The other one is making sure that Europa Clipper stays on track for its launch in October of 2024. So I fully expect by this time next year to have good indications of where Clipper is on its pathway. What we've been saying, and I'm going to stick to what we've been saying, is that we're working through the budget process right now, while we're looking at the fiscal year 25 budget. And as part of that process, we are looking at what the landscape looks like for restart for Veritas.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Our next question is from Teresa Foley of Aerospace America.
Hi, and congratulations for all the positives that you're citing to us. I wanted to ask Tom Young and perhaps Dr. Fox for a broader overview of what the, sorry, I'm getting double stuff on my phone here. What is the overall picture of how many engineering and technology job openings NASA has overall right now, and what is the shortfall? I'm particularly interested in how you see your job openings competing with Silicon Valley or the commercial space industry, other sectors, for this, what is apparently a very limited talent pool. And correct me if I'm wrong on that.
So we are limited on sharing any information about hiring policies and numbers like that, and definitely don't have any off the very top of our head right now what kinds of openings we have. I would certainly invite either Nikki or Laurie Leshin to weigh in if they want to add something else to that. But the specific numbers you just asked for are not something that we can hand out. I'm more than happy to look up in more detail what we can share with you and get back to you.
Yeah, I think Laurie Leshin had some nice comments on just your retention. Obviously only in the board things, because I know we can't give out that information. But Laurie, you want to repeat it?
Yeah. So right now our sort of annual retention rate, if you will, like turnover in a given year, is about 5%. I think it's 11 or 12% on average in aerospace, but you should really check me on that. It's been interesting recently. Well, so I'll say two things. One, there is more competition with the commercial space sector because there is a much more significant commercial space sector, which has been part of NASA's strategy for a very long time. And it's really actually, like, as hard as it can be for us, it's actually gratifying to see that the investments that we are making and the partnerships that we are building to help advance the commercial space sector are really working. And so I can, on one hand, be upset, but I can also, be heartened that we have such a resilient and growing commercial space sector. But it definitely means, here in LA, there's a lot of sort of space startups and growing space companies, and that's great. And you know what? Overall, over time, it's not necessarily a bad thing that people have multiple types of experience. And so I actually think that's okay. But we just need to make sure that we're paying really close attention to making sure that we have the workforce we need to get our work done. So that's on that side. On the Silicon Valley side, I'm sure you've been reading about Silicon Valley-based layoffs in the last few months. When we hear about that, or, unfortunately, if a space company is having challenges, our human resources team is aggressive at setting up a job fair, at making sure we're doing directed outreach to former employees of those companies to make sure that we're finding those where there could be a place for them at JPL. So we're also being opportunistic there as things shift and change.
Yeah, this is Tom Young. If I might add to it, I don't have any numbers for NASA, but my observations clearly are that, as Laurie just mentioned, the competitive environment for the kind of people we're talking about is very strong. And, numbers are important, but the most important thing is people who have the experience necessary to do the extraordinary things that JPL and NASA does. And that's probably where the resource is most limited, and also is in greatest demand with the various industrial components that exist. And I think that's why one of the things that JPL did in response to our report was, I would say, significantly revamped the hiring and retention function at JPL. And this required, spending a lot of effort identifying who are your most important people, being sure that they understand their role and their importance in the organization, and also in competing with others, recognize that time is important and critical, and you have to move fast in the hiring phase of the competitive environment that exists. So it really took JPL, what I'll say is a whole new way of going about retention and hiring, and I think they've done that with extraordinary excellence. I'll add one other thing. JPL and NASA also have what I call a competitive advantage. There are not many places you can go work and explore space. And at least to me, having been involved in that pretty much all my life, that's pretty cool and pretty exciting. And they're both great places to work. And if people can really understand the opportunity that they have to grow and expand in careers, that also is an effective tool in both competing for and retaining people.
I think that's still you.
I think we still have background noise, but so I believe we're ready to move on. I am going on to our next question, which is from Marina Corin of The Atlantic.
Hi, this is kind of a follow-up to Emily's question earlier. Given that NASA and JPL were prioritizing Psyche, how many people were pulled from the Veritas mission to work on Psyche? And a general question about workforce needs on planetary missions. Has JPL ever experienced this level of understaffing and lack of talent before? Thanks.
So I'm going to let Laurie answer that, but I don't think there's lack of talent at JPL. I'm just going to put that one out there. Laurie Leshin.
Thank you, Nikki. In fact, we spent quite a lot of time talking to the IRB about the incredible depth of the talent and capabilities here on all of our missions, from Clipper to MSR to Psyche. So, you know, that nobody was pulled exactly. What happened with Veritas is it didn't ramp up as expected, and Psyche stayed ramped up longer. So it is, so it's a bit of a hard question to answer. Yeah, so Psyche has been staffed for most of this year at about 160 JPLers. And some of those may have gone off to work Veritas if it launched, but I'm not certain of those numbers. If Psyche launched, I mean.
Thank you very much, Laurie Leshin.
Oh, and about the staffing question, about is this unusual? I mean, when I said talent, I mean that as a corporate term, right? You know, like just people who work at JPL. Yeah, I didn't mean
individuals. That's what you meant. Got it.
Talent at JPL.
You know, I've only been here a year, so I'm not certain I can answer that. It's, you know, when you've got multiple large missions pressing for launch, there's and you know, everyone here has to be able to charge their time to something. So we always, I would say, run tight, right? You cannot have people here who don't have an assigned job, and so we're always trying to do just-in-time staffing, I would say, and manage that and optimize that across a lot of different missions. So it is a challenge, and it's one that takes senior management attention. And I think as all organizations were in the pandemic, that senior management attention was on a lot of things. And so, you know, now we're back to really making sure that we are optimizing the distribution of talent across our missions, and that is paying dividends by them all being staffed with great teams.
All right, thank you so much. Moving on to our next reporter, the question will be from Shannon Hall with Scientific American.
Hi, thank you. This is along similar lines. I'm just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of those staffing issues. I mean, is it simply that there's increased competition from the private space sector, or are there other issues happening at JPL? And what have you really done to optimize your hiring and retention, and specifically bring back those employees who had left? Have you been able to increase your salaries, offer better benefits? What else?
Okay,
I think that's you again.
that one is for me. I mean, can't really get into lots of specifics. Obviously, these are individuals that we want to be respectful of. But again, I think Tom said it best. We have overhauled. We've increased the number of staff in our recruitment team, and we always have tried to stay in touch with former JPLers, and we're stepping that up as well, and just to try to keep people connected to us so that it might well be that they decide they want to come back based on what I think could be a lot of factors. I won't tell you that I have spoken individually to any of these folks to sort of hear their stories, so I don't have specific details on why someone made the decisions they made. But we are focused on things like making sure that that compensation and benefits are competitive. One of the things you may have heard about that we did over the last year was make sure we had paid parental leave for all parents. That's relatively generous at 8 weeks of paid parental leave, so which was a new benefit for us. So there are things like that that we are looking at all the time to make sure that we have the world-class workforce we need to do our world-class missions. Thanks for the question.
All right, a reminder, if you have a question to ask, go ahead and press *1 to get in the queue. And our next question is from Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much for taking my question. It's for Tom Young. I'm just glancing through the slides here on the web. And of course, I've only had a couple minutes to do that. But I do notice that you've got, I think it's 3 areas where the response was appropriate with additional work needed, and only one that was inadequate, which was the SRB review process. Could you talk a bit about those, and especially the SRB review process, and are you going to be following up on this since seems to be the only one that is inadequate?
Good question, Marcia. I'll take that one first. We were asked when we started this activity to look at a small number of kind of special topics to see what role it may have played in the Psyche issues that exist, and one of those was to look at the SRB activity. And our basic conclusion was, when we looked at the SRB, was that though they had some understanding of issues that existed in the software development activity, that they did not identify the problem to the degree that was necessary or with sufficient timeliness to take corrective action. And by the way, they weren't unique in that. That was a pretty much across-the-board observation that we made. So we actually then dug a little bit deeper in the SRB process because it can be an extraordinarily credible or project management tool. And our basic observations were that there are a collection of elements that are involved in the SRB process. One is the SRB itself. It's pretty important, one, that the right people for the particular project that's being reviewed or selected to be on the SRB. It's also important that they meet frequent enough that they are kind of in tune with what's going on with the project. So the second thing that's pretty important is that the project and the SRB have a relationship that effectively communicates issues and treats them with the importance that's necessary. Again, our observation was that the SRB, I guess I'd say, indication there may be some issues were not really clarified to the degree that the project made a judgment that they were issues that were deserving of a lot of attention. There's a third party that's really involved, and that is the SRB process is really a process of NASA headquarters, and they have the overall responsibility for SRBs. And I think it was also true that they also were not responsive to some of the indications from the SRB, which were also not well defined. And so our general observation was, and the reason for the inadequate was that our belief is that the SRB process can really be a valuable contributor not only to Psyche, but to pretty much all of NASA's projects, and that our observations based on the Psyche experience, and by the way, many of us had knowledge of the process above and beyond Psyche, and we had similar observations, that it was something that really needed a lot of attention. And to NASA's credit, NASA agreed. I mean, NASA also believes it needs a lot of attention. And they have special activities that are ongoing at the current time to better understand the issues, both those that we identified and others identified, to really strengthen this, I call it today, weak link in the project management chain. So I feel pretty good about having an inadequate assessment. And that may sound strange, but I think sometimes you really have to face very hard issues that are deserving of additional attention, and be sure that the evaluation is such that responses will evolve that are really critical to the corrective action. And my observation is that's happening at NASA today. I've heard their plans, and I'm familiar with what it is they're doing, and I applaud very much the fact that I have high expectations that we are going to actually get this SRB process under control so that we really can count on it to be a check and a balance on flight projects.
Yes, and Tom, this is Laurie Glaze. I'd like to just jump in real quick to add a little bit more to this, Marcia. And this is a really key finding from the IRB in regard to the standing review board process. And as Tom mentioned, these review boards, we've got typical processes that regularly look at our projects. We have a real opportunity now to respond to some of the direct findings from the IRB to make these SRBs really add significantly more value to our missions as we go through development. But this is so much bigger than just Psyche or even just JPL. In fact, it's even bigger than all of the Science Mission Directorate. The intent here is to take the findings and really overhaul or relook at the SRB processes across all of NASA. And so the agency now has a chief program management officer who is David Mitchell, who is also a member of the IRB, so he's very familiar with what the findings are and the intent. And he's leading an effort that's agency-wide in looking at the SRB process and how we can improve that process, again, to add more value to each of our missions that we're developing.
Marcia, if I could also add, you also asked about other areas where we had additional work necessary, and I'll just cite a couple examples so you can get a feel for what it was we were talking about. One of the special items we were asked to look at was the Maxar relationship on the Psyche project, and our observations were quite positive until the COVID circumstance really complicated the relationship. But the reason that we have on that particular one appropriate with additional work required is that it's necessary that the lessons learned out of that experience be documented, because I think they can be very valuable to others. I think there's always been an intent to document them, but we kind of had additional work required to focus on this documentation to just make sure that it got the appropriate level of attention to be sure that it was properly executed. Another example was that when we first looked at Psyche way back when we were first established and right after the launch had been deferred, we looked at other things that existed at that time, and one of the areas was operational readiness. And our assessment, which is very well documented in our original report, was that operational readiness had not received much attention at that particular time in the program, and largely probably because of the other items, the GNC software issues, as an example. But when we did our assessment, we did take a lot of look at operational readiness. The progress in that arena was significantly good. but still a lot to be done. So we chose to put some emphasis in additional work required on operational readiness, not so much that we didn't think the right activities would be done, but again, just to kind of put a stake in the ground as to how important it was to do this in a timely fashion and to be sure that it got the emphasis that was necessary. So I would say that's how we use the concept of additional work required, not as a negative, but as an area that says, in addition to all the other good things that are being done in this area, be sure that these particular items that we highlighted get the necessary attention that's necessary to maximize the probability of success. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of appreciation. As I said in my introductory remarks, and I'd like to repeat here, appropriate with additional work required, both in our view were outstanding ratings, and one just saying we were asking for attention of these kinds of items that you and I are now talking about.
Thank you so much, Tom, for that for the nice detailed answer there. Moving on to our next question, we have Emily Lakdawala from Sky and Telescope.
Hi, this question is for Laurie. I was just wondering, to what extent do you blame the pandemic for the workforce and oversight issues that were revealed by the report, or were these problems already brewing before 2020? And then I have a follow-up to that.
So I assume that's me, Laurie Leshin. Emily, thank you. So look, I think as the original IRB report found, the pandemic was a contributor to where we found ourselves with Psyche. And I agree with that. I think it was a contributor in several ways, but one of those ways was in the level of senior management attention, because again, as I was not at JPL at that time, I was running a university, and I can tell you a lot of senior management attention went into making sure that our workforce was safe. And I know that was true here at JPL as well. And so it would be unwise to say anything otherwise, right? So it was definitely a contributor, but it was not the only reason. And so again, that's why we've addressed hybrid work and hiring and retention as part of our response, but we've also addressed, the level, how we're doing senior management engagement, how the line management is supporting our missions, and a few other issues as well. So it was a part of the answer, but not the whole answer.
Thank you. And then to follow up, during the pandemic, there are a lot of people who, for whom working from home was enabling, people with disabilities, and then now there are people with long COVID who find the return to work difficult. And anecdotally, I've been observing that several of those types of people with these disabilities are having to leave JPL due to the changes now to returning to more work. So I'm wondering how you're addressing that with your retention issues that were identified in the report.
Well, our policy obviously is to make sure that we can accommodate people with disabilities fully, and so we have a process to do that. And in some cases, remote and hybrid work can be a solution to accommodation issues. So, but we do that on a case-by-case basis, obviously, and through very structured sort of set of activities. I'm not aware of the anecdotal evidence that you mentioned there. In fact, I see quite the opposite, which is that many people are very happy to be back once they're back a few days a week, very happy to be back on lab and to be reconnecting with colleagues. But of course, understood that not everybody's going to be able to do that. And we also have a fraction of our workforce, something between 15 and 20%, who are working fully remotely. And our policy also calls for having those folks have a regular sort of at least quarterly in-person interaction with their team so that we keep those face-to-face connections as needed.
Thank you, Laurie. We're moving on to our next question, which is from Marina Corin with The Atlantic.
Hi again. This question is for Laurie Glaze. In your decision to focus on Psyche, how did NASA decide to delay Veritas instead of the other Venus mission that would have launched around the same time? Obviously, Veritas is the one that's managed by JPL, and maybe that's the only reason, but I don't want to assume, so I'm wondering why you chose Veritas for a delay. Thank you.
Sure. So this was something that was really difficult decision to make. No one wants to delay any of the missions, and particularly a mission that was actually doing well along their planned schedule. But we did have the IRB report, which had indicated that there were some challenges in staffing the missions out at JPL. And so that's where the challenge was. Yes, there were some budget drivers as well, but as we're looking at where to make an adjustment that can allow us to respond to the IRB report, it was clear that we wanted to try and alleviate some of the stressors and pressures out at JPL in a way that headquarters could have some control over. And in doing that, we wanted to look within the planetary portfolio, since that's where the Psyche mission resided, and we also wanted to look towards those missions that were earliest in their development, those that had not yet ramped up. So you heard Laurie Leshin say earlier that the Veritas mission had not yet ramped up to their staffing level, and so that is a place where we could make some efforts. Yes, there is an impact, but it's an attempt to try and make that a minimal impact.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that, please, Laurie, which is, just to make it clear, that was an SMD leadership decision. They chose to delay Veritas based on the findings and recommendations of the Psyche IRB report. So it wasn't a planetary alone decision. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Looks like we are winding up. We do have one more question from Teresa Foley of Aerospace America.
Hi, thank you. I would like to ask about Mars sample return. I know that's not the main topic today, but I'm wondering, are there staffing and hiring issues comparable? Where does Mars sample return stand as far as having enough talented? That's a really challenging mission. And just to clarify, is that remote work policy 3 days a week on site, is that a NASA-wide policy or is that JPL? So I guess I have a two-part question, but I'm quite interested in the Mars sample return, how things are going with that.
All right, let me start with the Mars sample return, and then Laurie, come in. Either of the Lauries actually come in behind me if you want to. So the Mars sample return is doing very well. We have the project is making great progress on doing the formulation of the mission and looking at all the ways to retire risk and make that mission successful. We did kick off their independent review board last week. They kicked off at JPL. And so they, of course, will be looking into all of the questions, making sure that, everything is on track with Mars sample return. But they have a extremely talented workforce working on that difficult mission. And we have every confidence that they will move ahead and be successful. Laurie Leshin?
Yeah, the hybrid work policy I mentioned is only a JPL policy.
Does anyone else know what the NASA-wide policy is for days on site versus working from home?
So there is we as civil servants we follow the OPM rules, which are 2 days on site every 2 weeks. However, we have people that come in a lot more frequently than that.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That is the last of our questions. I appreciate everybody coming today. If you have a question that we weren't able to get to and you want to send a note to me, Karen Fox, please feel free, and we'll see what we can do to get you additional information. But thank you for joining us, and I think we will say goodbye.